Well, since I believe strongly that most of the anxiety from children comes from the adults in their lives, this is actually really critical to figure out ways that we can help all the adults deal with their stress. And we'd obviously hope that all adults have significant others that they can truly talk to and share all of the things that are bothering them. This is a little bit of a simple thought, but once we get the problem on the outside, which means we share it with another significant adult, we can't help but feel just a little bit better. I wish there was more discussion about ways to help adults with stress. Hopefully, they're participating through with their churches, temple, and mosque as much as they can online. And I do think it's important to stay connected to extended family. The 24-year-old struggling with a couple of kids at home, I hope he or she is talking to their parents virtually daily and getting some support, for example. I think that in particular, personnel like school psychologists, school counselors, and social workers, they're well adept at doing things like classroom guidance lessons during the normal school uh, day, but I think they could schedule some things developmentally where today the school counselor wants to talk to all the fourth graders. Maybe most importantly, gather some information from fourth graders in general about how they're doing, and then talk with them about coping and ways to reduce anxiety. So use the school personnel that we have that are trained in mental health. I, like everyone, obviously want some normalcy of school to start again in the fall. Some years ago, I read something that goes like this: 20% of all Americans go to school. You're the kid, you're the teacher, you're the bus driver, you work in the cafeteria. I mean, it's like such a large segment of our population. And we all desperately want normalcy. Yet we keep hearing, well, we're not sure. There could be another second wave. Every time we get, you know, thinking school is going to resume, sure, it'll be different, but at least kids and teachers will be back together, whether it's a staggered schedule, but there'll be some degree of normalcy. At some level, I do believe all parents care, but often they're so busy and have so many other issues that they can't really focus on their child. But I would hope the school counselor, school psychologist, the social worker, I would hope the kid in this circumstance, you know, 30 minutes a week with the school counselor is not enough. Hopefully the school counselor could be like, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 2 o'clock, we're talking about this and how can I support you? So often it can be an adult from outside the home that has such a positive impact on a kid, except right now, all that contact will have to be pretty much virtual. Every kid has a story to tell about this quarantine. And I hope that we can figure out a way that, like, every homeroom teacher, for example, calls every kid and talks to them, but most importantly, really listens. I also like the idea that, at least with older kids, we could send out a survey to them to get an idea about how they've been coping. What are they worried about? what will help them feel safer. So gathering input from kids and the school reaching out. I mean, it can't just be the bus pulls up this morning, come on back in. I mean, we've got to spend a lot of time in preparation and listening to kids about their concern. I'm actually the most concerned about kids that are disadvantaged and kids that live in poverty, kids that don't have parents that can be advocates, kids that might have parents where English is not their first language. Um, I mean, we need to do extraordinary things to try to reach out to those children because, to be honest, some kids, they're sitting in a situation with good lighting, good structure. Mom is home and she can actually help with the assignment. That's not the case for a lot of kids. We have to acknowledge there's certainly going to be reteaching in the fall, but there may be a group of kids that are going to need a lot extra to catch up because they basically were not really online much the last couple of months of school and they couldn't understand it and there just wasn't enough help. So we may need to figure out ways that we can provide really some pretty extensive tutoring for the kids that we know are disadvantaged. Well, I don't think we know yet. There are some pretty dire forecasts based on when we've had stock market crashes, for example, when we've had natural disasters. And since I've really concentrated on youth suicide prevention, here's what I think. It will go up, the suicide rates. How much? I don't think we know. But we need to be alert for some kids lost a loved one to the virus. That is a given. And we also need to recognize some kids are now living in poverty, and that was never their circumstance before. But at the foundation of youth suicide is untreated or undertreated mental illness, often in combination with an adverse childhood experience. Well, losing a loved one is certainly that. Or now living in poverty, that's also an adverse childhood experience. And I think we can't lose sight of the fact almost all suicides are preventable if we all know what to look for and what to do. Sadly, suicide is the second leading cause of death for every kid between the ages of 10 and 17. More and more, even third and fourth grade kids are making suicidal statements. And yes, adults need to take them seriously every single time. I'm going to be honest and say I'm actually very frustrated with schools. Suicide has been a problem for a very long time, yet most schools provide virtually no training for staff. They provide no training for parents, and they're afraid to even bring up the subject of suicide. They're afraid when we talk about it, that would cause the kid to think about it for the very first time. Nothing could be further from the truth. There's excellent data out there, Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance Survey, indicating, unfortunately, large numbers of middle schoolers and high schoolers think about suicide, and a number of them actually make a plan. And right here in Florida, 7.9% of high school kids in Florida made a suicide attempt in the last 12 months. So how can schools basically ignore the volume of this behavior? They cannot do it alone, but schools need to partner with community and state initiatives. And my simplest hope, if we did this right in schools where everybody knew what to look for, what to do, the next generation of adults would recognize when their college roommate, their coworker, their elderly neighbor is suicidal, and they would know what to do to help them. So we need to talk about suicide prevention more in our homes, schools, communities, and in our religious places of worship. So, I've spent pretty much my entire career in school crisis prevention and intervention. And so many of the things that I am so passionate about, they're not usually on the main agenda for superintendents and principals. But maybe this is the time when it finally will be, where we'll schedule trainings for all of our staff about how we can become a trauma-informed school, how we can be alert for kids that, I think we have to honestly acknowledge probably a number of kids will have been abused over the time at home. And how can we identify and reach out properly? And it involves training. I would hope the school principal forms a little committee. They need teachers on it. They need parents on it. They need to be talking about getting input about the plan. I'm afraid that too often, let's imagine you're the superintendent and I'm the deputy superintendent. We sit here and we decide this is the plan. Well, that's not really appropriate. It's like, first of all, superintendents and deputy superintendents are usually a little removed from the reality of what's going on with kids, teachers, and parents. So we just need to welcome that input. And I know that ultimately the superintendent is making that decision, but they need to gather input from all concerned, even the older students. In fact, one of my thoughts about school safety is it's largely an inside job. We got to get a commitment from the students first, then the faculty, parents, and the entire community. So my wife used to be a principal, middle school, high school. She always had a safety task force that involved the students themselves. And so I think some of the ideas about crisis intervention can be applied in this situation. And so if it was up to me, it'd be like this fall, it's not going to be all about the academics. This fall, it's going to be all about social, emotional wellness, connections, relationships, building that relationship to make sure every single kid feels like there are multiple adults at school that truly care about them.